Some of the most barbaric war criminals of the Second World War were found inside of the Japanese army, and it's believed that around 14 million civilians were slaughtered by the Japanese forces in the conflicts in the Pacific. There were even two officers who had a competition to see which one of the two could execute 100 people the quickest using a sword, and this was then reported by Japanese newspapers almost like a sporting event would be. At the end of the war, there were a number of prominent members of government and military commanders who were brought forward to trials to answer for the crimes of soldiers, and a number of them were executed for their actions. But what was also brought to courtrooms was shocking allegations and accusations of torture of prisoners of war, and some of the methods deployed by the soldiers were ruthless, barbaric, and evil. Welcome to the Fortress. Join us today as we look at Japanese torture methods of the Second World War, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to click subscribe down below. The Japanese forces used torture on prisoners of war who were captured all over the battlefields, and the treatment of these people that they were subjected to was harrowing. Torture was used by the Japanese to gather military intelligence, which could then be passed on, and they searched for information such as positions of troops, but they went to extreme lengths to get this information. Many of those who found themselves subjected to torture were later executed, such as Allied airmen, a number of whom were actually executed by sword in medieval-style executions. One former Japanese army officer claimed about torture that the major means of getting intelligence was to extract information by interrogating prisoners. Torture was an unavoidable necessity. Murdering and burying them follows naturally. You do it so you won't be found out. I believed and acted this way because I was convinced of what I was doing. We carried out our duty as instructed by our masters. We did it for the sake of our country. From our filial objections to our ancestors. On the battlefield, we never really considered the Chinese humans. When you're winning, the losers look really miserable. But there were a huge variety of torture methods used. One of these was known as simulated drowning, which was practically waterboarding. A victim would have their head covered by a sheet or a piece of material, and water was then poured over their head. They would suffocate and lose consciousness, and sometimes to resuscitate the victim, the torturers would jump on the victim's abdomen to expel the water, and then the torture ordeal would begin all over again. This was harrowing, and much of these treatments were conducted inside torture chambers and dungeons well underground to make sure that the screams of the victims could not be heard. Flogging was one of the most common torture methods deployed by the Japanese, and this involved prisoners being strapped to posts or locked inside special chambers and rooms, and they would then be whipped by a guard. They also forced prisoners to beat the victims whilst the guards watched, and victims suffered broken bones, lacerations, and other internal injuries, and if someone lost consciousness, they would be revived and then subjected to more beatings. The victims also died from this, and it was known that a sentence of 25 lashes could be fatal because of the pain. Floggings also occurred inside of prisoner of war camps, and the guards carried out this with the consent of commandants to punish those who broke the rules of specific sites. There were even beatings using baseball bat-style pieces of wood administered inside of Japanese camps, and also it was used on prison ships where POWs would be moved to different places en masse. During torture sessions inside of these chambers, often performed by guards, was the removal of fingernails and toenails from a victim, which would cause huge amounts of pain. Examples of this was used inside different occupied lands, such as China, the Philippines, and even within Japan itself. Victims were also forced to kneel on sharp objects, which could slice through the flesh of a victim. They were made to do this for hours, without being able to get off. If they moved at all, they would be then beaten and flogged. During the medieval period, suspension torture was used by the Spanish Inquisition in the form of the strapado, and even inside the Tower of London, the manacles were used to extract information. This was considered a lesser torture, but the Japanese also used this, and they suspended prisoners by their wrists, legs, arms, and even necks at times, and this caused victims' joints to separate from their sockets. This was also used alongside flogging and beating, but also used was something called the knee spread. This was used upon victims who had their hands tied behind their backs. They were then forced to kneel with a pole placed behind the knee joint. Pressure was then applied as the guards would kick and press on the thighs of the victim, causing knee joints to separate. Also, burning was used upon the victims, as someone would have lit cigarettes, burning candles, hot irons and boiling water thrown onto their body. Heat was also applied to different regions of the body, and this was used on a huge scale inside of occupied lands, and evidence of this was found all over. But electricity was also used, and specifically shock torture was deployed, and electrical current would be applied to a victim's body to shock them. This was done on sensitive parts of the body too. But one lesser known aspect of the ordeals of victims was the mental torture they were often forced to face. Psychological torture was deployed to cause chaos within the minds of the prisoners, and the Doolittle flyers who had conducted air raids were subjected to this. Those who fell into enemy hands were marched blindfolded a significant distance, and they believed they were being led to an execution site. The victims could hear the voices of what they believed was a firing squad, and they heard them raising their rifles. Just then, before the order to fire would be given, a Japanese officer would come out, and he said, "We are knights of the Bushido of the Order of the Rising Sun. We do not execute at sundown, we execute at sunrise." The victim was then taken back to his cell and informed that unless he talked before sunrise, he would be executed. These mock-style executions were also used by the German army. They were intended to terrorise, with someone believing their end was on the horizon. One of the strangest torture methods used by Japanese interrogators was also known as bamboo torture, and this was where a bamboo shoot would be placed near to a cage or a confined space where a prisoner was then locked inside of, and these fast-growing shoots would then puncture a victim and grow through the body, allegedly. At the end of the Second World War, stories about bamboo torture did emerge, which included tying a victim above a bamboo shoot. Then after several days, this would grow through the victim and emerge to the other side. It's believed that this was also performed upon locals inside of occupied lands, and it has been tested that a shoot could penetrate the human body. The crimes of the Japanese forces during the Second World War were endless, and even shocking medical experiments were carried out upon civilians, and there were also accusations of cannibalism levelled against some ardent forces. But the torture methods used during the conflict against prisoners of war were aimed at brutalising and also forcing someone to submit and provide information. If someone did pass over intelligence, there was a good chance that they would be executed anyway. But using methods such as electric shocks and water torture was barbaric, and because of this thousands of people succumbed to their fates within these Japanese torture chambers, and many more were changed forever by their treatment at the hands of their guards. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.